somebody asked me what I thought about Kenny Omega. And this, as I was trying to formulate an answer, this led into a bigger topic that I thought we would discuss today. And this is something that can be ongoing. And we'd like the Cult of Cornette to weigh in on this, either on Twitter or by email or whatever means that you deliver your fucking ranting and raving to the world. People, basically, this is a loose list of people that I think should have never been booked again, that committed such a heinous offense against the wrestling industry that they should not have been booked again by anybody in a perfect world. What is it that constitutes an automatic disqualification from the wrestling business, right? When do you revoke your permit that you've been allowed in this business? And if everybody would band together and do the right thing, nobody can ever be, as we've seen and we will discuss, nobody is ever permanently banned or disqualified or run off, but they should be sometimes.
Absolutely.
And now people are saying, well, I guess we know where his fucking head is on Kenny Omega, but here's my thing. I very briefly met him a time or two at some Ring of Honor events back 10 years ago or more. And I remember that some of the folks up there were high on him at the time. He had the blonde curly hair. To me, looked a little bit like Harpo Marx. They were high on his matches. Athletically, he was very good. I didn't think his basics were bad. His training obviously wasn't bad. He was a guy that concentrated more on doing athletic flippy stuff than actually being a good professional wrestler, in my opinion, at that time. But I thought maybe he'd grow into it. He did have the annoying habit of shaking his head up and down like the Ultimate Warrior, which just drives me insane constantly. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Do you know where he just always bobbing the head up and down, like when Warrior would shake the ropes? Yeah. Many muscle guys of the 80s started doing that. But anyway, but otherwise, young guy had just started out, whatever. Haven't seen him since. Did see him on New Japan Wrestling on my DVR the other night when I started clearing a couple of episodes off. The only other interaction since then, 10, 12 years ago, whatever, that I've had with Kenny Omega was, I know Adam Pearce, when he was booking Ring of Honor, had him booked on the, I believe, Final Battle 09 event. And this was before Omega, I guess, lives in Japan now or has been living in Japan or is there a lot, but he's from Canada. And he had worked for Ring of Honor when he was in Winnipeg or Canada mostly, and he was going on Japanese trips. But anyway, Adam Pearce books him for Final Battle 09. And then Adam sends me an email about a week before the show, and he says, look at this. And Omega had contacted him and said, I've hurt my ankle and I can't come and make Final Battle. But he attached a picture of like an ankle with some kind of goddamn leprosy or some horrible, awful, I don't know what the fuck it was.
What?
And Adam's like, was this I guess the supposition that Adam finally made of it, because he knew the guy or whatever, was that apparently he was saying he had hurt himself and he was not going to make the date, but he was obviously ribbiting about this, elephantitis or whatever, the ankle. And then, of course, we find out like 3 or 4 days after Final Battle, he's in Japan working just fine over there. He just, blew the date off. So that's why, we have not seen Kenny Omega in Ring of Honor for quite a while, because that carried over for a while when you just blatantly, no-show the biggest show of the year, when I believe had agreed to up until a week beforehand and had no knowledge of the Japanese. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. So I do hear over the past couple of years that Omega has quite a stellar reputation in Japan. So I watched this match on the New Japan show on AXS. Brian, help me. What is everybody raving about? I don't understand the broom thing. I know they go for the wacky gimmicks in Japan, and he's the cleaner. But I think the cleaner could be cool without a fucking broom. It looks so grade school. I don't see his facial expressions. He's a great athlete, to do the flippy stuff, but I'm not into his matches as contests. And as we'll go ahead and talk about, he's had the matches with the little girls and the blow-up dolls. But tell me what I'm missing as far as when he wrestles actual living men. What am I missing that Kenny Omega is this big star?
I don't know if I could answer that for you because obviously he's very talented and he's capable of being in a good match. But for me, I always find him to be too silly. I mean, you said you couldn't see his facial expressions. I've always seen that he's done too much of an exaggerated facial expression to the point where
as a matter of fact, I don't mean he was stone faced. I mean, they don't fit. You don't believe. I'm not buying he's in a match.
Yeah,
he's a guy wandering around doing an exhibition of shit.
Yeah, that's exactly the way I've felt, and I've never been a big fan of his.
Well, apparently, oh gosh, Kenny Omega's re-debuted in Ring of Honor, and Kenny Omega's this big star they're going to push in New Japan. If that's the guy they're pushing in New Japan, I know they're not going to rely on him in Ring of Honor, but if that's the guy they're pushing in New Japan, they got problems because here is where the automatic disqualification comes in. The crime so heinous and offensive that you should be never booked again and banned from wrestling, not because you lied and pulled out of a fucking date on Final Battle, not because you are a shitty wrestler. He has, and this has been on tape, and I've seen them. Have you seen them? The match with the blow-up doll, the match with the little 8-year-old girl, or was it a 2-year-old girl, or what? He's had these in Japan on shows. I don't speak Japanese. Maybe you know the context better than I do. How do you present? How do you talk a true professional who has respect for the business that he's in? How do you talk him into it? How do you advertise it? How do you justify it on a show with a ring in front of fans, having a match with a blow-up doll?
I can't justify that.
Do you have any context for this?
I think it was part of like a promotion that did silly matches and joke matches and had silly gimmicks, but
Well, then there is why, to me, Kenny Omega has disqualified himself in a perfect world from ever being booked again, because if all you are is a silly match, it's a comedy match, it's a joke matches, you make fun of what the real talents do for a living, and you hurt the business that the real professionals are in because you're a jack-off. And number one, until recently, any locker room in the country, you would have gotten your ass kicked by the boys as soon as you got back to the back if you'd have done that type of shit. And number two, the promoter, after he fired you, would make sure that you didn't get a chance to do it again anywhere else. And now everybody just either laughs at it or ignores it, and they should be ashamed of themselves too. But the fact that people have bad matches or people do stupid things where everybody does every move and nobody sells, and it's all obviously a choreographed tumbling routine is bad enough, but you shouldn't be permanently banned from the business. But when you do obviously phony, made up shit in front of fans on a wrestling card of any kind, and just not even expose the business, but just make mockery of it like that and spit on it. No, I don't think Ring of Honor, I don't think New Japan Wrestling, I don't think any reputable, responsible fucking wrestling promotion in the world should book this fucking, I've said before, I thought he should be boiled in oil. And that description, of course, before we get to the actual names of people I've heard of, we've got to throw the dick guy in there too. I'll say his name this time, Joey Ryan. Most people don't know his name because they laugh at him on the internet when it goes viral that he's done a spot with his dick, and they go, oh, look, that dick wrestler's doing something again. And then the third time, like the dog's fucking on the side of the road, third time you see it, you're bored with it and try to avoid clicking on the guy doing spots with his dick again. And the guys think it's cool and it's fun and he's getting over. He's a piece of shit, and he's making the business look like a piece of shit. And no, he should not be booked ever again when you do something like that. I know your favorite. Go ahead and nominate your favorite of somebody who did something. And this was not making a mockery of the business or making it look bad. This was a lot worse, but who did something that they should never got booked again. They should got disqualified.
I'll do that in 1 second. I think it's important to note for you that Kenny Omega is best friends with and teamed up with the Young Bucks in New Japan now. So that may tie everything together for you.
Well, I mean, yeah, no, and once again, I hate that I have to once again call this into prominence, but super kicking 8-year-old kids, but at least the kids sold it. For fuck's sake, but the Bucks, I like them as people, but they're so silly and they're never going to learn. They won't quit. And it's the same thing, but even, I guess on that, it's like Ole said to me one time, he gave me that compliment. Cornette, I used to think you were a dumb fuck, but so many other dumb fucks have come along worse than you. You moved up the ladder without doing anything. But because they actually worked competitively with an 8-year-old kid, it's not as bad as doing a spot with your dick or fucking working with a blow-up doll. So Kenny Omega and Joey Ryan have made the Young Bucks look good without the Young Bucks cooperating in the least. All right, nominate your fucking disqualification.
I'm nominating 3 people because they were all intertwined. I'm nominating Jose Gonzalez, Carlos Colon, and Victor Jovica. Jose Gonzalez, of course, in cold blood, premeditated, murdered Bruiser Brody in a locker room in Puerto Rico, came into the locker room with a dirty knife, asked him to come talk to him in the shower, and then stabbed him and left. Carlos Colon and Victor Jovica were the owners of the company, and there's lots of different stories about what their involvement was after the fact. Tony Atlas, in his book that Scott Teal did, says that they basically came and commandeered the hospital when Brody was still alive, and next thing they know, he was dead. So who knows what happened, but what we can say for sure is they used their television after the murder to make Jose Gonzalez, Invader #1, a sympathetic figure.
Oh, yeah. This has been proven. It was seen at the time. They wanted to protect their investment because they put their business over the fact that their partner just fucking murdered one of their top stars.
Yeah, and look, there's all sorts of stories, Jimmy, about subpoenas arriving in the United States after the trial for murder had already ended. There's all these stories. I think they even ran
Dutch got one of them.
Yeah, I think they even ran a Bruiser Brody tribute show after he died. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, and this is why people who listen to my show, 605 The Super Podcast, know I have a real dislike for Carlos Colon and for his company. This is exactly why, because Jose Gonzalez murdered Bruiser Brody. It's indisputable. He went into that locker room with a dirty knife for a reason. And then his partners, he was the booker at the time, his partners helped cover it up and helped get him off and use their political connections to aid his trial, or aid his defense, I should say. And I can't forgive any of them, and I think they should have been thrown out of the business and possibly thrown into a ditch bleeding.
Well, and also here's the thing. Now this calls into a question, the phrasing of our exercise here, because should never be booked again. He was the booker. When, the owner, because I've talked about people exposing the business. Well, then people say, well, Vince McMahon then should never been booked again, but Vince has never been booked because he's the owner. He's always been the owner. So if in this case, there could have been when there was a boycott amongst the talent. Puerto Rico, the territory, never recovered from that. Most of the top American talent never went back, especially the guys that were close to Brody. They never got the big names like they used to again. Years after the fact, some of that wore off because of then Carlos's sons obviously getting in with Vince and having a pipeline to at least some WWE talent, etc. But Jose Gonzalez definitely. I don't see how they ever had the balls to bring him back. I don't see how that anybody ever had how did you need the money that bad to work with the motherfucker?
Yeah.
So that's one of those things. But as it's been proven, because that's why there's no wrestlers union, folks, and that's why they're considered independent contractors, the boys can't stick together. Here is something else. Another guy that was never actually booked again, but skirted that by running his own company. I don't understand why David Schultz or some fucking nut didn't find Eddie Mansfield and just fucking leave his remains in a fucking ditch somewhere. Because this was so much worse than what Kenny Omega and Joey Ryan and the Young Bucks and guys like that do the funny spots or pull their pants down and stick their ass in people's faces on the independent show. We saw that one going around a while, here last week or whatever. They're doing it now. And yeah, a lot of people can see it on the internet, but let's face it, the people that are actually going to watch that for more than 5 seconds on the internet are people that already know about wrestling to begin with. And it's not on national television, and it's not telling people stuff they don't know. It's not breaking new ground. It's just further demeaning the business. But when Eddie Mansfield got on 2020 on the ABC network in 1985, when WrestleMania was about to take place and attention at wrestling was at its height, And not only fucking because he was a underneath fucking talent. It had a fucking wild hair up his ass that he'd been screwed around and wanted to get back at everybody, whatever the fuck. I saw him wrestle. Eddie Mansfield was not a memorable fucking talent, nor did he have any groundbreaking kind of gimmick. He was an okay fucking guy you could have replaced 20 million fucking times at that point in the business. But he gets on network TV and tells a lot of people shit they don't know. And he had the balls to get back in the business 5 years later and run his own company down there in Orlando, his little independent promotion. And guys worked for him. A lot of them had never been in the business when he originally did what he did, but still, I don't know why somebody didn't hunt him down and fucking, that's where we needed the Jack Pfeffers of the goddamn world. The old time, the old days, the Paul Bowsers and the Jack Curleys and the people that would have fucking, he'd have been floating down the river somewhere. Eddie Mansfield was a piece of shit, tried to fuck up the business that a lot of other people were successful at just for his own fucking hard feelings. And, no, he shouldn't have been let back in. I never understood that either. I talked to, who shall remain nameless, a couple of guys who I like very much at TNA who were like, yeah, when we were first breaking in, we used to get to work for Eddie Mansfield down here at his Universal, whatever the fuck. And I'm like, I've never understood it, that he lived through that, much less ran his own company again. People worked for him. Never got that.
Yeah, Kevin Kelly was his color commentator. It used to air in New York, the IWF.
And that's right, IWF or whatever. But, anyway.
All right, my next candidate.
Okay.
I'm going to stick on the topic of murder, and I'm going to stick on the topic of Eddie Mansfield because he's tied into this too, believe it or not. Jimmy Snuka. I mean, now, all these years after the fact, there's this trial going on, but it's not like this is the first time we've heard about this alleged murder of Nancy Argentino. It certainly isn't the only time he had an incident where he beat her badly and there were police involved. Yeah. It's not even his only incident, doing things to hurt the company. There was where was it? Was it Israel or Iran, or WWF in 1985 had a tour of the Middle East and Jimmy Snuka flipped out and, it was a big problem. And that was, I think, the end. That was when they finally got rid of him.
I don't remember the details enough to cite him, but I know what you're talking about. And as a matter of fact, we had last year Irv Muchnick on the program here to talk about the case because he obviously had followed it and was instrumental in getting it opened back up again and at least examined. And now, here's the thing. If it had been an isolated incident, I would have always given one of the boys the benefit of the doubt. But when shit was going on that in public, when they had just been arrested and there'd been the domestic incident at the hotel just weeks before she died, and then just the questionable bullshit. And yes, you can't convict somebody without convicting them. You can't say, well, we're never going to book this guy again until he goes to trial or something is proven. But once again, Vince stuck his nose in on that. And I think it should have been settled a long time before now.
Yeah.
If something was found out about it and that he was responsible, then no, he should have been booked. Now it's a moot point because he ain't never going to be booked again anyway, is what I'm trying to say. But if something was done, then something should have been done a long time before now.
It wasn't like anyone wasn't there. It was the Boys Hotel. He was the top star at that time. Bob Backlund was champion. But Jimmy Snuka had, in just a few months when he turned babyface, become the biggest star in that company by far. And a lot of people think that's one of the reasons why the fans turned against Bob Backlund was you finally had this other guy who you really wanted to cheer. So all this is happening. And at the same time, again, you can't dispute it. There's plenty of newspaper articles and police reports. He beat this woman up at a hotel in Syracuse, I believe. And then the second incident happens and she's dead. And he has a history of being violent against women, and they still went with him for another. He was with the company for another 2 years after that, even after multiple problems. As I think about it, the Middle Eastern tour, I believe they found him with cocaine taped all over his body, and that caused a big problem over there. So, I mean, it's just one problem after another, and he kept getting a free pass because he was a draw, he was an attraction, he moved merchandise, and again, you can't do anything about it now, like you said, but.
But think about this though. Karma kind of snatched him because that happened in 1983, and he was the biggest. He was the most popular star in the biggest promotion in the country, so he might not have been the biggest star in the business in terms of bigger than Flair or Andre or Dusty at the time. He was, you know, he was certainly top five, and by 5 years later, what at that point wasn't he working bad ESPN tapings at the Showboat for Vern and pretty much gone, and on, you know, he self-destructed on his own. Maybe was that his punishment?
But then they brought him back. Vince brought him back in '89.
Yeah, but he was never, again, he never had another run after, he was pretty much done by what, 90, 91? I mean, he began the endless cycle of the Herb Abrams UWF type of things. He was a shell of his former self. He was not working anywhere regularly, and I would not think was pulling down big bucks at that point, and that was a pretty quick decline.
Yeah, and again, though, he was also older than people realize, because when he hit in '83, I think he was already 40 at that time, or closing in on 40.
Well,
he wasn't a young guy.
True. That's true, because and actually, I remember seeing him in '83 and seeing him in '79, '80 in the Mid-Atlantic territory and live in Cincinnati, and the difference there was he was already declining, because my God, he was an animal. In the late 70s. It was just a beast athletically, like a coiled spring. And so, you know, he was older than people thought he was. Well, it's sad case. I got some that may piss most people off, but I referred to it earlier. I said I've never been a fan of Nash, and I don't think his heart bleeds for me that much. But I nominate, as somebody who should have actually, without question, lost their fucking status in the business, the Kliq for the curtain call. And I say this for this reason, because these guys were all four, within the space of a couple of years, given chances to make more money than they'd ever made in their life, doing something that only really two of them were really superiorly talented at, by a promoter that they then turned around while they were working for him and fucking shit on the business in that guy's biggest arena, the most famous arena in the world, Madison Square Garden, exposed the business in front of fans for no reason. It didn't fit anything to do with any story that was being told or anything that would help the company out. It was purely self-serving reasons. Baby faces hugging heels in public at a wrestling show in Madison Square Garden at a time where it was not commonplace for that to fucking happen. Jerry Jarrett said it on the program. What would you do if you had guys like that did that and wouldn't drop belts and held the company hostage? And he said, his quote was, it'd be like the morning after they shot President Kennedy. You'd be sorry that they were gone, but life would continue. He would have fired all four of them, because you can't have that. And I don't know why Vince McMahon was such of a pussy and so dickless, and for the genetic jackhammer with the balls like grapefruits to let these four fucking adolescent fucks jack off on his show and hold his company hostage and do all that shit and get away with it. I've never been able to figure it out. I wasn't a fan of these four because they hung out with each other, because I didn't like the way that some of them treated friends of mine. I didn't think that a couple of them were any fucking good. Shawn Michaels, I've said publicly, to me and everybody else that I liked or gave a shit about, was a prick. And so I was never fans, but I didn't think they should be disqualified and never be booked again and be kicked out of the wrestling business. But after that, that's why I've truthfully, after the curtain call, I've never had any fucking time for any of the four of them, because instead of being, even if they weren't grateful for the shot they'd been given after fucking Shawn Michaels, numerous times, pretty much, not all of them, but most of them had either been pilled up and fucked up and it had been overlooked, or they'd not done jobs they were supposed to do, or had asked off some kind of outside the ring behavior and it had been overlooked. Or the one guy, the son-in-law now, he'd only been in the company a fucking year. He was hanging around. He was the freshman hanging around with the fucking senior football players, and he didn't have any goddamn leverage, and he goes out there and participates in it, and they let him get away with it. And this was 5 years before he was fucking the boss's daughter. And the whole thing was fucking ridiculous. That just showed everybody else in the company there's no discipline here, and these guys get away with doing whatever the fuck they want. And I'm sorry. That's once again, that's why I've never had any use for any of the four of them, because they exposed the business publicly before it was done, before that kind of thing was done, in the world's most famous arena, and slapped the guy that was paying him more money than they ever made in the face, even if they weren't, as I was about to say, grateful. They were about to leave and go somewhere else, a couple of them, where they'd make more money than they'd ever made in their life again. And they just have to they can't show any restraint. They just have to show everybody we run this thing. And Vince McMahon was such a big fucking pussy on that night that he rolled over like an old whore the week of fucking prom and just spread his legs for everybody. And I've never been able to figure it out. And if I had been involved in any promotion or booking, if I'd had the stroke or the pull to do so, I would have fired all four of them, and they would have never seen the inside of a goddamn wrestling show ever again, because it was just fucking disrespectful. So if anybody disagrees with me, please send your comments to fuck you, because I don't care.
You know, it's similar to what you're just saying, but I would separate Shawn Michaels from the pack. Even though he's one of the most talented wrestlers of all time, how many times do you get to be unprofessional and get away with it?
Well, yeah, he was the worst one. He was the worst one. Yes.
Yeah. How many? He never dropped it. Other than Steve Austin, I don't think he dropped any of the titles he had by pinfall. It was always some, mysterious lost a smile. Or
I think there was one in there early on. I think somebody did a study and found out that he dropped like 2 out of 9 or something like this. Is some.
Yeah, I guess Jannetty actually pinned him for the Intercontinental title. But the thing is with him, he was unprofessional behind the scenes. He was unprofessional in terms of not doing what wrestling, what you're supposed to do, what your job is. And yet Vince McMahon treated him like he was drawing like Jim Landis, which clearly wasn't the case.
No, it wasn't, as a matter of fact. And during the year that he was champion in 1996, I was in the office, and I can show you the facts and figures. And he was not drawing like Jim Landos. Far from it. He was drawing like Jim fucking Norton. So anyway, for different things, I mean, certainly, obviously, murder is a disqualification. Murder is an offense. Okay, we're not going to book this guy anymore. Although they did book Dr. Sam Shepard, but he had paid his debt to society, and a trial had overturned him. So there, I guess he was okay. But murder can get you kicked out. As you can see, I'm heavy on respecting the business, and I believe that people expose the business on purpose should be fucking booted out of it. I long for the days when people respected and appreciated having been allowed into a closed fraternity, a special business where you were told things that the average person didn't know about how the thing worked, and you were expected to keep care of it. For the good of everybody, not just yourself. But if you didn't like it, then fucking go do something else. Don't ruin it for everybody else that's staying. But I guess that's too respectful for some people to fucking figure out. And basically, the more money you're making, I can understand at some point, at some level, these fucking young jackoffs doing this stupid shit, and everybody takes the business as a joke because of things that they've done and things that people that have come before them have done anyway. But I can understand at some level they're fucking miserable. Go, well, what the fuck? I'm some outlaw show or whatever. But when guys do it in Madison Square Garden, to me, that's a bigger offense. So anyway, we will close the program this week by asking the question: who do you think, ladies and gentlemen, because of what grievous offense, should have been booted out, disqualified, disbarred, excommunicated, kicked out of the wrestling business, and never booked again for whatever reason?